Every club.
Every day.
The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Newcastle podcast. My name is Michael Grahamslaw, and, well, I'm alone. I am unfortunately not joined by any of the rest of the Toon team this evening, as they are all in St James's Park. Well, and they've just witnessed maybe one of the worst halves of football we've seen, but I volunteered to stay back. Well, not really. I'm luckily enough, I've got a flight to catch in the early morning, so I've spent my time packing my bags, and I've caught unfortunately, I've managed to catch the game, but unfortunately, that also does mean this is the last time you'll see/hear from me this week, so I wanted to make sure I pulled my weight. Maybe some of the Newcastle players could have done that in front of goal today, but yeah, rest assured, the rest of Team Toon will have plenty of fantastic content prepared for you for the rest of this week. But into tonight's fixture between Newcastle United and West Ham United. And, well, I'm going to split this up into three parts. So we're going to have the first half, the second half, and then I'll have a little bit of a summary of how the game went overall. So, going into the game, should I say, it's fair to say that expectations were high. Despite the international break, despite it being a Monday, we were in good form. They were in poor form and missing their best player in Mohamed Kudus. So much so, we all predicted a very comfortable win going into the fixture, which, to be honest, doesn't happen very often on this channel. And, well, in all honesty, after today's performance, you can see why. But going into the lineups, I think this is one of the first times I looked at a Newcastle United matchday squad and went, we can actually make 5 class subs during a game. And if you listen to our podcast through the week, you'll know that the Newcastle side was pretty much exactly as we thought. We did see some calls for Tonali to start on socials, but let's be honest, we see that every single week. As for West Ham, realistically, it was what we expected in the lineup. The one thing that maybe we weren't was former PSG midfielder Carlos Soler coming in for Guido Rodriguez, meaning that the Hammers had a better ball player in midfield than usual, and they didn't have their two defensive midfielders looking to break up the game. A slight change, but one that Newcastle should have been prepared for realistically. And the game begins. And immediately you're thinking, this is the game, we're going to grab that early goal. But no, unfortunately it remains 1 goal scored in the first 30 minutes of Premier League games this season. And unfortunately the goal for West Ham means that we've conceded 5 now in that period. Very slow start as Newcastle, and to be honest, it was probably one of those where we weren't up for it to start off with. We expected West Ham to roll over. And then by the time that, we realised they were up for it, we were probably 1-0 down. Isak did have the ball in the back of the net early on. Hall puts in a fantastic ball in behind. Isak's run is slightly mistimed. The finish is fantastic. I don't know where that finishing goes for the rest of the game, but the finish for the offside goal is absolutely fantastic, maybe due to the lack of pressure on him. But again, absolutely brilliant start in that regards. And in the opening stages of the game, I actually thought we did a fantastic job of getting the ball in behind Wan-Bissaka and Todibo. And to be honest, it justified placing Anthony Gordon on the left and Joe Linton on the right, because in my mind, common sense tells you Wan-Bissaka is the best one-on-one defender in the league. So don't put your best dribbler up against him. Put him against the attacking fullback on the other side, who, although Emerson had a fantastic game today, isn't that strong defensively. And to be honest, having Gordon against Emerson might have pushed him back a little bit further and stopped him having such a good game. But to be honest, we started strong. And, Gordon on the left, Joe Linton on the right, it worked for the opening stages. So, my theory, personally, I can say that was wrong. Because second half, will it come? In fact, I'll talk about the second half later. But towards the end of the first half, Joe Linton goes back over to left. going to the right, and we don't really create all that much afterwards. So it's a difficult one to say whether that was the right decision or not, but we started strong, and it seems like that was the way to go forward. And then in typical Newcastle fashion, we give the ball away cheaply, we give away a cheap corner. Emerson takes an outswinging ball to the edge of the 6-yard box, and Souček heads home pretty much unmarked. At first, I thought it was an excellent finish. I thought, oh, he's managed to get his head down and just knock it into the corner. And then, unfortunately, when you watch it back, it's not a very good moment for Lloyd Kelly. He's been watching the game live on Flintstones internet. The stream's buffered. He's hesitated, and unfortunately, it's cost Newcastle United a goal. And in typical fashion, it's the first goal that West Ham have scored from a corner or a set piece this season, and it's the first that we've conceded. Typical. But then after the goal, should I say, the game changed. West Ham were the better team, in my opinion, to be honest. We seemed a little shell-shocked, and I have to say the atmosphere became quite flat. For a good 10-15 minutes, it was almost as if the fans were shell-shocked of, wait, we're behind? Really? Again? And then midway through the first half, I mentioned Willett goes off at half-time, but Willett comes off around 28 minutes, and you're thinking, this is going to be one of those days, isn't it? And yeah, it pretty much was. We start coming back into the game. Credit to the crowd. They start getting back into it. There wasn't much to shout about, but everything that there was, the crowd was trying to get behind it. You felt it in the first half. Lewis Hall drives forward, a great run from almost in his own half, to be honest. He beats a few players, takes a strike, deflects off the defender, and it narrowly escapes a Newcastle player just waiting to tap in. And that was pretty much a summary of how every other effort was going to go for Newcastle. Longstaff puts in, I'm just going to say it, a dreadful ball, and Todibo makes a complete hash of it. Gordon should make it 1-1. He just takes a swing at it, and to be honest, you look at it, the spur of the moment, it's not really surprising that he has decided to do that. Instead of chip it, which I know everyone was saying that he should have done at half-time, but in the spur of the moment, you're just looking to get a foot on the ball and you're just looking to put it in the back of the net. Fabianski makes a good save. You can't dwell on that one too much. But at a point, you can feel the atmosphere changing again and the crowd are getting behind the team again. And Bruno lifts a cracking ball over the top of the defence. Isak chests it, and it's almost perfect. It's slightly off. It just hit. How do I say? It's not quite Shola Amiobi chest control, where if it went to Shola's feet, it would bounce off and land in Gateshead. But on the chest, it was tight. While Isak, it was just a little bit out, and unfortunately, his shot just goes wide of the target. But what we're seeing is that West Ham were really struggling with the press at the end of the first half. And overall, I thought first half we were quite good. At this point, we're unlucky to be behind. But credit to West Ham, they'd made things difficult. We struggled to break them down. And they turned what had been Newcastle's strength, which is the zonal marking from corners so far this season, had turned it into a weakness. For me, our best player of the first half was, without a doubt, Lewis Hall. And at this point, I'd made notes that I'd been disappointed by our wingers, Gordon and Joe Linton. I thought they'd both been relatively poor in regards to sort of beating their man and getting down, sort of creating chances for Newcastle. While, to be honest, you could say exactly the same with Isak in regards to finishing, but his movement was on point today. Isak, he just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. Overall, a very frustrating half. We could have scored 3, but circumstances meant we went in at the break 1-0 down. It felt like one of those games where if it continued, we were going to get back into the game. We'd seen like the likes of the Everton game, the Brighton game earlier this season, and it didn't feel like that at half-time. I personally felt like we were going to get back into it. Fool on me, I guess. But before we get into the second half, I do just want to give you a quick advert from one of our sponsors. And unfortunately, it is going to be more of listening to my voice. But let's try and change it up again here with our Zencastr advert. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform, and Zencastr claim out a clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, Zencastr, for the sponsorship. But if we go into the second half, Newcastle are 1-0 down. Typically, we lack confidence at this stage, but this season, in the second half, we've been pretty good. And I was quite confident we'd still get something from the game. Harvey Barnes came on for the injured Joe Willock at half-time. Thankfully, it doesn't really look like a bad injury for Willock. And considering Bruno goes down the tunnel with a knock later on in the second half, both of those being short injuries rather than long injuries could be the difference between a decent season and a good season. I don't think we'll have a dreadful or a bad or a great season at this point. It'll either be sort of on par or reasonably good, which is strange to say coming off a 2-0 defeat at home on a Monday night. But the second half starts as the first finishes. Newcastle on top, but we weren't actually threatening West Ham at all in those opening stages. The best chance comes from Joe Linton winning the ball, knocking it forward to Barnes. He knocks it forward, so he makes a little run down the left, cuts inside. Maybe should have played Isak a little bit earlier, who's making a drive and run the left channel. But realistically, he does what he should do. He creates a space. Gordon's making the run over the other side. The ball just isn't good enough. I think it's Max Kilman gets a touch on it, and the ball just goes slightly behind Gordon. Gordon picks it up and gets a decent effort off. I thought that was going to be one of the sort of the moment where we go, right, Gordon's going to start creating something for Newcastle here, and we're going to really up the tempo. And the tempo was upped for a couple of minutes, but it was by West Ham, who went up the other end of the pitch and made it 2-0. It was good work by Jarrod Bowen and Paqueta. Paqueta wins the ball in midfield, knocks it at Bowen. Bowen draws, I believe it's Longstaff and the fullback together. Finds Wan-Bissaka, who finishes it like he's a centre forward. He's only scored 3 goals in his career, and 2 of them have come in St James's Park. Can we sign this guy so he can stop scoring against us? Or can we just let him go to Italy or something like that so he can leave us alone? Because I think he's a brilliant defender. He's never any good at attacking until it comes up against Newcastle. But fair play to him. It's an absolutely fantastic strike. And nothing Nick Pope can do about it. But once again, West Ham score with their first shot of the half. And all of a sudden, Newcastle have a lot of work to do. Didn't really look like doing it. Both teams make substitution. I just made a note of that simply because I thought it might have been something that changed the game. And to be honest, potentially it should have. With Mavropanos replacing the injured Todibo for West Ham. And Sandro Tonali coming on for Sean Longstaff, who unfortunately had a pretty poor game for Newcastle. But in the second half, West Ham were well on top. They looked dangerous pretty much every time they went forward. One of these teams was in form and the other wasn't. However, if you watch the game, no one could tell you who the confident team were. It looked like West Ham were the Conference League winning team. And first half, we looked like the team that finished 4th. We were the better team. We played well. We created so many chances. Could have scored 3. Second half, it was, I don't want to say as bad as McLaren, Bruce and Carver, but it has to go down as one of the worst halves of football under Eddie Howe. But Howe will know that. Howe will have looked at what went wrong. There was a lot of changes made, and to be honest, I don't think any of them actually improved the team, unfortunately. But substitutions this season have won us games, and they've been pretty good, so, can't complain about that overall. But I do think today, none of the substitutions really made any difference whatsoever. It looked like for a minute that the highlight of our second half might have been Nick Pope hitting the linesman with one of his clearances, which, to be honest, it was a really poor clearance. He didn't really have to kick it out. But at that point, a little bit of comedy was pretty much the only positive Newcastle had. Then Callum Wilson and Jacob Murphy come on for Joe Linton and Gordon, both of whom were very poor. And immediately you sort of see what Wilson brings to the team. I'm probably one of the lesser advocates for Wilson at Newcastle United, particularly in the Daily Newcastle team. But when we moved to a 4-4-2, and it was kind of clear that the strategy was just to get the ball out wide and cross it into the two strikers. You saw what Callum Wilson brings to us that other strikers typically don't, and it didn't result in a goal for us today, but it should have ended up in a penalty. I don't think we deserved the penalty based off how the game was going, but let's be honest, it's not a scoreboard game as, you've played well, so you're going to get a penalty. It's a moments game where, right, you can be absolutely dreadful for 45 minutes, but if you're electric in that one and you get a penalty, it doesn't matter. So that's kind of how it was. The cross comes in. I can't quite remember who plays it in. I want to say Livramento, just with the sheer amount of crosses he got into the box, but I could be wrong. It comes over from the right-hand side. Wilson goes to get it. Mavropanos almost pulls Wilson back, gets his arm around him, and then jumps into him. It's a bit of a strange tackle. And if I'm honest, there's definitely been children who have been born in the northeast or anywhere in England thanks to less contact than that. But it's just another moment that didn't go in our favour. And as I said, second half, we didn't deserve it. We didn't play well. First half, good. Second half, very poor. And realistically, that was the last of any real action in the game. Extremely poor is one way to summarise the second half. First half, again, we weren't bad, but credit has to be given to the West Ham. Credit has to be given to West Ham, as normal football fans say, for picking up a good 3 points to them, which I'll say through gritted teeth. But on a Newcastle front, it's a little concerning because it's 1 point from a possible 12 in our last 4 games against teams below us in the table. When the odds are in Newcastle's favour, if you're a betting man, run the other way, because we aren't very good. But it's hard. It's difficult to put your finger exactly on why that is the case. And maybe we'll look into it more. We'll deep dive on a Tactics Tuesday. We've mentioned it a few times that Newcastle really struggle when we have the majority of the ball. That wasn't even the case today. West Ham were fantastic on the ball. It just seemed like we just couldn't break them down. And we really lacked any sort of idea in that second half of what we could do differently. First half, we could have scored 3. And I think we score any of those chances, it's a completely different game. We probably win the game comfortably. But it just wasn't to be for us today. But yeah, 1 point from a possible 12 in the last 4 against teams below us in the table. It is concerning. And the wins against Nottingham Forest and Arsenal maybe mask over the fact that we're not doing as well as what we maybe should against these kind of teams. But if I had to give props to any player in the second half, I'll give it to Nick Pope. Didn't really have all that much to do, but made a few good saves. He couldn't do anything about the goal from Wan-Bissaka. I thought Fabian Schär wasn't too bad either. He was reasonably solid. Unfortunately, Lloyd Kelly had moments of fantastic, brilliant defending. The last-ditch tackle for Somerville is the one I'm thinking of there. And a few moments where he just seemed devoid of quick thinking, let's say. But ultimately, the biggest difference was the clinical nature of West Ham compared to the usually clinical Alexander Isak, leaving his shooting boots in Sweden. But he did use them quite a lot against Azerbaijan, so yeah, let's blame that for one Monday evening. So that's that. Newcastle lose 2-0 to West Ham, and overall we deserve nothing. A really poor performance in the second half after a strong start, and it has to be said, this is a real missed opportunity for Newcastle. We could have gone into the top 6 with a victory, and unfortunately we're now just 3 points off 14th place. The league is so tight right now, and unfortunately we might find that we slip into the bottom half if we don't pick up a win against Crystal Palace, because up after that is Liverpool. Although given Newcastle's form, that might be a game that suits us better than what West Ham did. But effectively, results like today make the Arsenal result null and void. Because for every game Newcastle defy the odds and pick up that, shock victory, we have a game like this. And it's similar to the Luton games last season, the Nottingham Forest game at home last season, where, you go in expecting so much and you leave disappointed. And it happens with every Premier League club. But Newcastle, it seems like every single time we start, well, I know personally, I start getting confident and I start being positive, we end up, I end up being pretty negative again pretty soon because poor performances and poor results. But I will say, there is no point in looking at this game and saying anything negative about the season as a whole. It was dreadful in the second half, yes. But if you look at the conversation for Europe, we're still well involved with it, despite not being at our best. And a win against Crystal Palace, who, let's be honest, haven't been very good at all this season. Neither were West Ham, but we make our own luck. We change things. We move forward. But today, luck just wasn't on our side. We weren't good enough to make our own, and West Ham thoroughly deserved the 3 points. And if they play like that, they could be another competitor for Europe this season. But I've got a feeling it's going to be another one of those where the team turns up under the lights Monday night, St. James's Park, and then aren't great for the rest of the season. But I've been Michael Grahamslaw. I wish I was talking to you all in better circumstances, but we take the minute positives and move forward to Crystal Palace. Remember, no matter what happens, no matter how many disappointing results we see, we quite simply go again. Up the Mags.
Every club.
Every day.
The Global Sports Podcast Network.